In the misty realm of Smoked Valley, a legendary figure emerged, the renowned Fang Xing, acclaimed as the 10th Master Thief. Once content with his life of thievery, he championed the redistribution of wealth, robbing the affluent to aid the impoverished. Fang Xing upheld a moral code, rewarding kindness with kindness and delivering retribution to the wicked. However, the tides of fate took an ominous turn on that fateful day. A cultivator named Xiao Jianming, hailing from the prestigious Qingyun sect, swept through Smoked Valley with destructive force, decimating Fang Xing's clan and leaving nothing but death in his wake. The Ghost Smoked Valley clan held themselves to lofty principles, defending the people against injustice and reserving lethal force for those deserving of it. Fang Xing watched in anguish as his leader confronted the cultivators' ruthless deeds. It was the cultivator's duty, as a Taoist, to safeguard the well-being of the common people, yet here he was, executing the dirty bidding of corrupt officials, dismantling the last bastion of defense against greed and corruption that the common folk relied upon. Concealing his presence, Fang Xing observed the cultivator arrogantly dismissing any concern for their identities before effortlessly dispatching the person he had revered for so long. As the cultivator strolled away, the heavens seemed to cleanse him of his sins, while carrions commenced their grim task of obliterating the existence of the Ghost Smoked Valley clan. Overwhelmed with grief, tears cascaded down young Fang Xing's face as he vowed to forge a path of strength. He resolved to join the Qingyun sect as a cultivator, regardless of any ill intentions harbored by its members or the dangers lurking at every turn. Sooner or later, he would amass enough power to exact his revenge, fueling his relentless pursuit. As the sun bathed the enemy's territory in its warm glow, Fang humbly knelt before the esteemed Taoist master, beseeching permission to enter the revered sect. With utmost sincerity, he unveiled the tapestry of his life, hoping it would weave a compelling narrative for acceptance. Once a member of a joyous and prosperous family, his world was shattered by a malevolent force in a single fateful night. Amidst the ruins, he and his sister emerged as the lone survivors, and their arduous journey was punctuated by whispers of the illustrious Qingyun sect. Desiring a master who would welcome him into their honorable fold, Fong was resolute in his determination to prove his worth and embrace the sect as his new family. The imposing master stipulated that Fong produce a recommendation letter, but the earnest Fong misunderstood, thinking he meant an uncle. With genuine innocence, Fang Xing explained that he had no uncle to vouch for him. The master, driven by an endearing fondness for the child, even proposed that Fong offer a valuable treasure as a token of entry into the sect. However, the young Fong, clinging to his humility, insisted that if anyone possessed such treasures, they should be bestowed upon him, for he would truly make use of them. As the little one merely used the master as a jungle gym, the latter searched for any justification to grant Fang Xing admission. Inquiring whether the child possessed a rare constitution, a qualification in itself, the master was taken aback when Fang Xing humorously claimed his capability to consume food. Puzzled, the master wondered if the child comprehended the significance of their location. Fang Xing cheekily retorted that if the master had truly listened to his life story, he would have known that they stood within the sacred grounds of the Qingyun sect. The master proceeded to enlighten the child with a captivating history lesson on the illustrious Qingyun sect. This venerable institution had withstood the test of 3 millennia in the Chu kingdom, commanding profound respect and boasting a lineage of accomplished practitioners. Each disciple who joined this esteemed sect attained mastery in their own right. With pride, the master shared an anecdote of their senior brother, Xiao, who single-handedly eradicated the thieves dwelling in the Ghost Smoke Valley, eliminating 9 out of the notorious 10 great thieves. Simplifying matters for the young beggar's comprehension, the master explained that lacking a recommendation letter marked one as a commoner, while the absence of treasure signified poverty. Furthermore, the lack of a rare constitution rendered one seemingly inconsequential. How audacious for a lowly, impoverished individual like Fang Xing to dare to seek entry into the illustrious Qingyun sect. Swiftly, the master dismissed the child, making it clear that charity had no place there and beggars were not welcomed. The onlookers in the queue could scarcely believe the audacity displayed by youngsters in this day and age. As Fang Xing departed, he couldn't help but express his disdain for the large master, labeling him a foolish and overweight swine. Unfazed by the master's inquiry, he shamelessly broadcasted his derogatory words for all to hear. The once hopeful admiration Fang held for the sect had transformed into a burning desire to see their temple reduced to ashes. The rotund master, offended by the brat's disrespectful gesture, simmered with anger. With fury propelling him forward, the master lunged at Fang, determined to capture the elusive troublemaker. Yet, to his chagrin, the nimble child proved as adept at evading capture as any seasoned thief. Fang continued his assault of offensive gestures, offering the irate master yet another display of contempt. Thus, the conflict turned personal. The master announced to the crowd that whoever apprehended the miscreant would be granted preferential treatment, allowed to skip the line. Fang stood there, taken aback, as a wave of malevolence surged against him. He marveled at the audacity of such cheaters. The pavilion's inhabitants hastily joined the pursuit, resulting in a chaotic dogpile that rendered grown men foolish while the slippery brat managed to slip away. Frustrated with all the nonsense, Fang decided to make a daring escape. However, in his haste, he couldn't resist delivering one final gesture of defiance to his pursuers. Lost in his provocation, Fang was swiftly apprehended by a novice cultivator. Seizing the opportunity, the master gleefully rushed in, reveling in his good fortune. The novice, named Ho Ching, introduced himself and assured the master that catching the young troublemaker posed no challenge. Delighted to aid his senior brother, the master planned to personally guide Ho Ching through the registration process, once he had imparted a memorable lesson to the insolent brat. Intent on shielding her young master, a young girl rushed toward the scene, but her own clumsiness caused her to stumble. Even as her master berated her, she staunchly defended him, rising to his defense. Fang had instructed the young Shao man to remain hidden, aware of the disdain people harbored toward Man individuals. The master was surprised to learn that a beggar had his own half-human slave. Amidst their argument about the young master's ability to protect himself, Ho Ching, the prospective cultivator, swiftly dispatched the hybrid creature, eradicating the filthy beast with ease. Tragically, the little mon collided with a tree, her blood staining its trunk as she lay motionless. Witnessing this scene, Fang vowed to someday take Ho Ching's life. The older man dismissed the brat's threats, asserting that he was free to try if he could. A crowd gathered, indifferent to the fate of the half-human, until an astonishing sight unfolded. The earth began to sprout, and within moments, the tree surged toward the heavens, compelling everyone to shield themselves from the magical force. The little mon possessed the rare bloodline of the wood element. This wondrous spectacle captured the attention of the esteemed senior sister Lingyun, gracefully arriving on the back of a majestic crane. Waste no time she did, swiftly collecting the spilled blood and carefully examining its extraordinary properties. Cradling the young man in her arms, she commanded that the child be included in the list of disciples to enter the revered sect. In her current state, her utmost concern revolved around the safety and well-being of her master Fang Xing. Eager to learn the whereabouts of this individual, Fang Xing forcibly wriggled free from his captor's grasp, tumbling to the ground. He demanded the immediate return of his sister from the senior sister. However, her response was dismissive, merely casting him a glance and informing him that, henceforth, the young man was no longer his responsibility. The senior sister deemed the priceless innate purple chi pills as a form of compensation. A surge of jealousy rippled through the crowd, causing an eruption of emotions among the onlookers. Uninterested in the pills, regardless of their value, Fang Xing vehemently declined the offered gift. This caught the senior sister's fleeting interest, as she momentarily found herself intrigued by the young man. In his eyes, such trifles paled in comparison to the opportunity to enter the prestigious Qingyun sect. Resolving to allow his entry, she made it clear that his talents were perceived as mediocre at best, giving them the freedom to do as they pleased with him. With his little sister held securely in her hand, the senior sister departed atop her crane. Fang Xing found himself in the desolate heart of nowhere, surrounded by vast stretches of farmland as far as the eye could see. His new senior brother had purposefully chosen the lowest possible position for him. It became painfully clear that this was not the glamorous Qingyan sect he had envisioned. He was informed that his new abode was none other than the Qingyun sect herb fields. Baffled, Fang Xing couldn't comprehend why his senior brother had led him to a field of herbs. He considered himself a disciple, not a farmer. However, his senior brother insisted that his new role would be tending to these fields, emphasizing its importance. After all, where else would the faithful disciples obtain the vital spiritual herbs for their cultivation? Recognizing the work as mere slave labor, Fang Xing couldn't help but feel relegated to a menial task rather than a true disciple. The ungrateful brat continued to express his discontent. Despite his senior brother offering him a coveted position that others were eager to obtain, Fang Xing threw it back in his face, displaying his rudeness. His new belongings were tossed at him without any regard. Upon inquiring about a book among his belongings, he was informed that it was none other than the Qingyun Forging Qi book, a fundamental text that every disciple was expected to thoroughly master. Fang Xing, who had no intentions of engaging in forging, deemed the book to be useless trash. This remark deeply offended his senior brother, as the book held utmost importance within the sect. Its contents were exclusively reserved for the eyes of disciples, strictly forbidden to outsiders. The senior brother emphasized that devotedly studying the teachings within that book would eventually lead to the first level of spiritual movement, and grant Fang Xing official disciple status within the Qingyun sect. However, he harbored serious doubts about the brat's talents, casting uncertainty on such a future. Yet Fang Xing gradually came to realize that the book might not be as terrible as he initially believed. In fact, it seemed to align with his own inclinations and interests. As the chubby senior brother departed, he advised Fang Xing to seek guidance from his direct senior brothers should any questions arise. With an unsettling grin, he insinuated that they would offer their assistance in their own unique way. Fang Xing harbored an unwavering determination to prove his piggy senior brother wrong. Yet, no matter how diligently he trained, the elusive sensation of qi eluded him. Doubts crept into his mind, questioning whether he possessed any true talent for cultivation. His current predicament served as a valuable lesson, teaching him to never blindly trust the words of senior members within the Qingyun sect. The thieving senior sister's ambiguous words failed to specify that he would become a genuine disciple. Moving forward, Fang Xing vowed not to be deceived by empty promises alone. If reaching the first level of spiritual movement was the key to becoming a true disciple, then he would achieve it. Furthermore, he began to ponder the authenticity of the booklet he possessed. The more time he spent with it, the more he sensed its legitimacy. He couldn't fathom how his piggy senior brother had casually tossed it to him without revealing its true nature. Fixated on the cover, Fang Xing witnessed an astonishing spectacle. A surge of intense heat and a radiant blinding light emanated from the title, Yin Yang, Divine Demon Book. The room became suffused with an aura of mystical energy. As if guided by a higher force, the energy and knowledge sought a new vessel, and Fang was deemed worthy of receiving it. His eyes became a window, allowing him to peer beyond the veil of the mystical energy. Gradually, the energy subsided, merging with his being. It was in this moment that the Qingyun Forging Qi book spoke directly into his mind, unveiling its true purpose, a cultivation method for those in the condensing Qi realm. It taught the refining and gathering of Qi to transform it into divine power. Enveloped in newfound enlightenment, Qi began to form and swirl around his core. After countless hours of arduous practice, he finally succeeded in perceiving the flow of Qi. However, although it may have seemed like an overwhelming amount of Qi, in reality, only a minuscule fraction of divine power was absorbed into Fang's being. As abruptly as it had begun, the experience came to a halt, leaving him momentarily suspended in midair. His descent back to the ground was accompanied by an accidental bump on the head. Overwhelmed with disbelief, Fang Xing realized that the book he possessed was a truly unparalleled artifact. Not only could he now perceive the flow of Qi, but he had also assimilated all the knowledge contained within the revered Qingyun sect's book of forging Qi. Lost in the bewildering aftermath of his extraordinary experience, Fang Xing inadvertently dropped his ID token, which slipped from his clothing. As he reached out to retrieve it, A foot abruptly landed in his path, belonging to a group of older boys who stood before him. Intent on intimidating Fang Xing, they had come prepared to teach him a lesson for disrespecting senior brother Steward Yu. With an innocent request for them to remove their foot from his token, Fang Xing hoped for a peaceful resolution. Instead, he was met with a swift and harsh lesson on the new order of things. The towering boy made it clear that talking back was strictly forbidden. United in their purpose, the group vowed to uphold their boss's words. Realizing the precarious situation he found himself in, Fang Xing obediently fell in line, understanding that they were all set to bully him. Helplessly, he warned them that he would scream if they dared to lay a hand on him. Laughter erupted from the group, as they knew they were isolated in a 10-mile radius. He could scream all he wanted, and no one would come to his aid. Tears streaming down his face, Fang Xing made a desperate promise to do whatever they commanded. Expecting some resistance, the group was surprised to find none. The boss callously slapped him aside, determined to teach the coward a lesson. Fang Xing, cunning in his own way, recognized that stirring up conflict at this moment, when he had just begun to sense the flow of qi, would be unwise. Henceforth, the group put Fang Xing to work in the fields, subjected him to menial tasks such as scrubbing their laundry and chopping wood. While they indulged in a plentiful dinner, he received nothing more than a meager bowl of rice. However, amidst his meager meal, a taste of sweet revenge lingered. Fang Xing had endured his time as a dutiful servant, secretly accumulating the knowledge he needed. Finally, the time had come for his plans to unfurl under the shroud of darkness. He was poised to deliver a lesson that would upheave their current arrangement, reversing the power dynamics they had so cruelly imposed. Under the cover of darkness, Fang Xing stealthily entered the bully's room, intending to deliver a few gentle wake-up smacks to the boss. However, seeing that it had no effect, he swiftly shifted to his plan, launching an attack towards his enemy. The strike connected, causing the bully to jolt awake with a piercing scream. Fang Xing was confident that after this night, the bullies would think twice before choosing their targets for discipline. The commotion attracted the attention of his other senior brothers, much to his dismay. Regrettably, his initial attack had missed its mark, merely inflicting minor damage. This only served to enrage the larger bully, who sprang out of bed with the intention of putting down the cowardly intruder skulking in the darkness. Asserting his presence, Fang Xing released his spiritual qi, easily evading the incoming blow. With a demonic expression emanating from his every fiber, Fang pressed forward with his plan, driving his dagger into the bully's left cheek. The bully's underlings could only watch helplessly as the relentless assault continued, the little beast thrusting his weapon repeatedly. As a final warning, he declared that he could scream all he wanted, as no one would come to his rescue. The sight was so terrifying that a puddle formed beneath all of the young boys who watched on. After cleaning his equipment, Fang apologized for disturbing his brothers with the commotion. In an act of betrayal, the former underlings pleaded for forgiveness, assuring him of their ignorance and emphasizing that he needn't pay any attention to such insignificant characters who were nothing more than insignificant specks beneath his feet. Fang, not one to hold on to pointless grudges, simply assigned them all to work in the fields. The group toiled tirelessly under their new boss, collecting the spiritual herbs he needed to advance his cultivation. Yet, no matter how swiftly they picked, it was never enough to satiate his insatiable appetite. Now assuming the role of boss, Fang inquired about his underlings' progress in the Qingyun Forging Qi book. The former leader, having been there the longest, admitted that despite daily practice over the past 6 years, he still couldn't sense the flow of qi. The rest of them had been practicing for roughly half that time. However, the valuable information they shared was that only 1 or 2 out of every 10,000 laborers progressed to the position of disciple each year. Fang Xing basked in their praise, pleased to have accomplished such a feat in such a short amount of time. Yet new concerns began to surface in his mind. Although he believed he had consumed enough spiritual herbs to break through to the next level, his progress seemed to have stalled. Unbeknownst to any of them, an unexpected visitor had been silently observing their every move. Piggy's senior brother had come to assess the progress of breaking in his new laborer, only to be astounded by the fact that the little troublemaker had emerged as the dominant force, surpassing all his former underlings. He couldn't believe his eyes, suspecting it to be a hallucination. How had that little brat risen to the top of the hierarchy in such a remarkably short time? Fong worked his new crew ragged. Even with an injury, his old bully did his best to keep up with the others in the fields. So when one of the others decided to step in the patch of spiritual herbs he was collecting, he wasted no time giving them a piece of his mind. Whoever this blind bat was going to catch it. But he immediately realized his error and changed his tone. The intruder was none other than senior brother Steward Yu. He wanted to know the exact location of the little animal Fang Xing. The former leader began to call Fang his boss, but thought better of it. He reluctantly informed the senior brother that the animal was resting in his room. For his failures, he had a sword pointed at his chest. He was ordered to make the little animal wish he was dead. He insisted, while he is incompetent. The animal is a cruel demon. If he hadn't conceded to him, he would have lost his leg. A swift kick to the subordinate's face sent him flying. With tears in his eyes, he informed the steward that there was no way for any of them to even touch the little animal. He had progressed to his next level on his road of cultivation. He looked to the others to confirm if Fang Xing had managed to unlock spiritual qi. The group insisted they had all seen it with their very eyes. The piggy senior brother was a fast thinker, and quickly came up with a plan to entrap Fang Xing. He stalked away, insisting he be escorted to the little animal immediately. But first he ordered them to retrieve spiritual herbs from the field. The group retorted that using herbs for personal use was too serious a crime to frame him with. He insisted that it was none of their concern and he wouldn't take kindly to them questioning his actions. Fong was in his usual spot trying to break through to the next level of cultivation. But he wasn't having much luck. He was going to need some other catalyst to push him through. He slowly opened his eyes as the intruders disturbed his progress. The piggy's senior brother rushed in, levering accusations in his direction. Fang Xing, as a laborer of Qingyan Sect, you have committed the crime of deceiving your superiors and subordinates, having no regards for law and order and picking herbs for personal use. He flung the evidence before Fong and inquired what he had to say for himself. He was impressed that his piggy brother was trying to frame him. As the steward of the fields, the piggy brother wouldn't have trashed breaking the rules and ruining his reputation. He gave Fang Xing a simple ultimatum. He could go willingly to the medicine department to receive punishment. But if Fang resisted, he couldn't be held responsible of what happened next. Fang's spiritual qi blazed up surrounding his body. He assured his senior brother that things would be different this time around. He wouldn't be at the mercy of the senior's whims. The senior knew this animal shouldn't have been allowed to join their sect. Just because he had formed spiritual qi, he felt he could do whatever he pleased. But inside, the senior was shocked and impressed at the speed in which the brat had managed to unlock his qi. Fong was not going to underestimate his enemy. The senior piggy had to have a cultivation at least in the first level of spiritual movement, and the pig most definitely possesses more spiritual qi. But that only meant that Fong had to end this fight as soon as possible. So he wasted no time being the one to deal the first blow. Upon blocking the first attack, the senior knew he would have to put effort in if he was going to win this. His strength wasn't on par with the little brat's. But he would make up for it in skill. The multiple attacks he took their toll, eventually shattering the bone in his arm. The little brat had figured out how to use his qi to strengthen his attacks. If he wanted to continue this, he was going to have to take this to the next level. He ordered the kids to get lost. The little animal had given him no choice. He released his fan of swords with no hesitation to destroy the little brat. And to be sure his attack landed, he cast a sword formation shield to trap the brat in place. Fong hadn't expected Piggy Sr. to be this hard-pressed to get a win. This sword formation can only be activated once you hit the first level of spiritual movement. But with your cultivation level, it's essentially impossible to escape. He admitted to being impressed that the brat could form qi, but this is where it all ended. Fang Xing was like a trapped rat randomly attacking, trying his best to break the shield. The senior insisted. All he had to do to be let free was to respectfully atone for his sins 3 times, and henceforth referred to him only as master. The stupid pig was dreaming, if he thought that was going to happen. The senior piggy decided if the kid was going to be that way, then he could just die. Fong timed the incoming attack perfectly. When the barrier dropped, he burst forward. But halfway to his target, Fang Xing was overwhelmed. The sight of the piggy in his mind's eye sent him hurling into his past. He had no idea what was going on. Had he died? He was staring down at a familiar scene that he had never witnessed from this viewpoint. A disaster has struck across the whole valley, ruining the crops of many of the people. But the corrupt Imperials could care less. They demanded their taxes above all else. They cared not if the people starved to death. The food still had to be delivered. A child's parents had refused to hand over the grain, and for that they were executed. Even after their death, the child held on to the grain for dear life. The master of the Imperials decided a lesson had to be taught to everyone here. He removed his sword and proceeded to strike the child down in cold blood. As the blade swung through the air, the kid knew his death was assured. But instead of steel, his face was splashed with the warm blood of the master. Fang Xing watched on as he removed the arm from the Imperial. His former family, the Ghost Smoke Valley thieves, rushed out to protect the people of the village. He remembered clearly him asking the young boy why he was kneeling upon the ground. The young boy knew who they were and knew he was safe in their presence. His exact words to the young orphan were, "The Ghost Smoke Valley thieves never kills the common people, only dog officials and profiteers." As he rushed into battle, the young boy called to his back, asking to join their caste. He only replied that the boy was too young and that he should come to them only when his hair had fully grown. This was the first time he saw the puzzled look the boy gave him as he rushed away. He could just imagine the boy thinking the thief was also only a child. That encounter was the day he got his first ever wanted poster. But to his horror, they got everything wrong, including his name. He was the 10th great thief Fang Xing. Not some old bald-headed man, named Zhang Matzi. While his family cheered his success, he merely pouted. He ordered that it looked nothing like him, so it didn't count. His 9th uncle was only making fun of him. They couldn't believe their little boss was angry. None of them possessed a wanted poster. With this, he would become the face of their group. They were all impressed by how far he had come. He had single-handedly led the operation. None of them could match his speed as he rushed forward and cut down that dog of an officer. The pose he struck was truly domineering. As they proposed a toast in his honor, a giant boulder crashed into their meeting hall, sending everyone flying. Instead of the soldiers they expected, a single man stepped in, sword in hand. While the others thought the sight of a single man was a relief, his 9th uncle knew better. For if a single man was so bold, he could only be a cultivator. He ordered them not to engage. None of them had ever laid eyes on a cultivator, and wondered what business he had in their valley. The 9th great thief did his best to parley. But after confirming they were all there, the cultivator merely proceeded with his operation. The thieves stood no chance. Before any of them could even attempt to stop him, the cultivator unleashed devastation upon the room. Even with the tip of his sword buried into the plank of the floor, blows rained down in every direction. He could see everything with his eyes, better than his memory had ever imagined it. Instead of attacking, his 9th uncle came to him. He ordered Fong to hide and to wait till the man had left. His uncle entrusted him with a task. He was to go to the 4th tree at the gate of the stockade. There he would find a package his uncle buried, just in case this day ever arrived. He was given the task to keep the contents safe, and to live on for all of their sakes. And with that, his 9th uncle headed into battle knowing he wouldn't survive. The Great Smoke Valley has always defended the people against injustice, and only killed those who should be killed. As a Taoist, it is more so your responsibility to speak for the common people in the world. So why do you choose to work for those corrupt officials to destroy the Ghost Smoke Valley? The cultivator only responded that the thief was misunderstanding his intentions. He cared not who any of them were. And Fong watched for the second time, his family being destroyed. The cultivator was merely following the law of the jungle. Up until that point in his life, Fang Xing had been living in an isolated bubble. He should have known this was a world where the strong dominated the weak. He came to, as a chi sword shot towards his face. As his senior brother insisted, he had no idea what power was. Fang Xing grabbed the incoming sword out of the air with his bare hand. The senior brother couldn't believe that this kid was capable of resisting his sword formation. The only way that was possible was if he burned up his meridians. But such an act was self-destructive to his own cultivation. But as he held the sword at bay, blood trickling down his hand, knowledge of the yin-yang, divine demon book allowed his spiritual power to increase. Instead of burning out, he was becoming stronger. And as the blade shattered in his hand, he became a vortex of energy, appearing before the senior ready to give him the threshing he deserved. A single blow to the face sent him flying. Fang Xing knew he had finally broke through the barrier that had been holding him back all this time. He had now progressed to the first level of spiritual movement. His former bullies couldn't believe what they had witnessed. Fang had surpassed the might of Steward Yu. They had roasted a whole pig's leg quarter in his honor. During their negotiation, he learned that his senior pig brother wasn't interested in killing him. He was only trying to teach him a lesson. The fact that he had used a wooden sword proved this to be true. The senior brother just didn't have the evil intent it took to kill anyone. With a simple hand gesture, he ordered his subordinates to untie the senior brother. The senior brother had been managing their herb fields for a very long time, and in all that time he had never come across anyone who had managed to break into the first stage of spiritual movement in such a short time. If only the senior brother had put his faith in Fong earlier, maybe things could have been different. Fong wasn't someone to fuss over past injustices. As the victor, he was willing to let sleeping dogs lie. Junior brother Fong, your cultivation is now in the first level of spiritual movement. Tomorrow you will only need to ring the cleansing heart bell and you will be promoted to an outer sect disciple. This senior brother would like to congratulate you in advance on your promotion. Fang Xing open-heartedly accepted the blessing. When the sun rose in the morning, he would set out on his journey to the cleansing bell. All his brothers were there to see him off as he departed on his journey. Even though they had only known him for a little while, they were all saddened to see him go. After a tireless journey and a long climb up a mountain of endless steps, he reached the summit where the cleansing heart bell resided. As he stared at the all-inspiring sight, he walked forward and with the palm of his hand rung the bell. The reverberations spread out, encompassing the entire mountainside. The sound of the bell spread far and wide to the ears of a certain individual of interest. Even though he had heard the bell rung countless times, this one paused him in his actions. His counterpart inquired why he paid the cleansing heart bell any mind. He insisted it was nothing. He was only lamenting fate. But he changed the subject, insisting that the two move on to a game of chess. The older gentleman insisted that the future is something that cannot be decided by anyone. As Fong stepped through the gates, he was greeted by an elder, who inquired if he was the one who rang the bell. He was invited in. He was now an outer sect disciple of the Qinyan sect. The elder explained that someone would be alone to guide him shortly. And with that introduction, his ID token updated itself, shining with an internal chi of its own. When he looked up again, his greeter was nowhere to be found. For Fong, this was only a pit stop on his journey to become an inner sect disciple. A familiar wind blew through the empty city. As a cultivator stopped in front of him, examining a piece of paper. It was the face of the man he would never forget. Xiao Jianming, the murderer of his entire clan. Fang Xing hoped he wouldn't be recognized. The cultivator was unaware that the great thief he searched for was within his presence. As he flew away, Fang announced to himself that he was here, and sooner or later he would gain the strength he needed to enact his revenge. As Fang stood at the front gate, waiting for the cultivator who would be his guide, a voice inquired whether he was the newly promoted outer sect disciple. But no matter how frantically he searched, there was no one in sight. But before his very eyes, his guide suddenly appeared. He stepped back and greeted his senior brother formally. But small talk and gestures of honor wouldn't get him anywhere in his new life. His guide was only interested in him handing over his token immediately. He fished it out of his clothes, and before it could be handed over, his senior brother pulled it to him with power along. Only to be disappointed by another good-for-nothing drinker. His token was casually handed back with his new rank etched into the wood. If only he had arrived a little later, his introduction to the Qingyan sect would have turned out differently. His senior brother Yu rushed to his side, but sadly he didn't make it in time. Fong watched on as his senior brother negotiated access to be his guide. The bag of coins he provided did the trick, and the two were left alone to continue with his orientation. Fong was surprised and honored that his senior brother had personally come to greet him. But his senior brother made it clear that the two were friends, so it was only to be expected. He got right to work, inquiring whether junior brother Fong had had his rank evaluated. Fang Xing was interested in understanding what the D-ranked aptitude was upon his token. His senior brother explained that in their sect the disciples are split into 4 ranks according to their aptitude. The ranks ranged from A to D. Fong was horrified to find out that his aptitude was the lowest of the low. And luckily, his senior brother was there to reassure him that it wasn't so bad. He wasn't the only D rank in the sect. Senior brother Yu himself and over half of the disciples in the Qingyan sect were among the rank of D. Since your aptitude was based on your talent, there wasn't much you could do about it, so all you could do is make the best of a situation given to you. It had been a long trip, so Fong was really looking forward to finding his place of residence. The tour could hold out till later. His senior brother understood the importance of him settling into his accommodations. But there was something more important he needed to do first. His senior brother's words made it sound like whatever it was super important, leaving him to impatiently wonder exactly what it could be. The two promptly arrived in front of the Spirit Tools Pavilion. The first honor of a newly promoted disciple was the ability to choose their first spiritual tool. It was a momentous occasion that you were only given once. The Spiritual Tools Pavilion was a sacred place that no one was allowed to approach, so Fong would have to go alone without the support of Brother Yu. He marched forward, intent on acquiring a tool that was perfectly suited for his needs. His brother called to him. There was specific information he needed to set him on the right track. He implored Fang Xing to keep an open mind. While the sect may seem like it was detached from the real world, it was in fact no different. Fong reassured his senior brother that he had this. At that moment, a group of rat-faced shysters made their appearance. The 3 exited the pavilion in step, inquiring who dared approach the Qingyan sect's Spiritual Tools Pavilion. Fong politely honored their presence, and informed them that he was new. On his journey here, he knew he would have to stroke the egos of a lot of disciples whose heads had swollen, until his presence was known. This would be the way of things. But these 3 rat-faced shysters were professionals. They were relentless in their pursuit to dominate him. First, they forgave him for trespassing, when he clearly was not. And second was their main goal. They were intent on shaking him down. Fong decided the innocent, clueless type was perfect for this situation. Today they would be putting in overtime to take advantage of this newbie. Since the little brat was playing dumb, they spelt it out for him. He could either hand over his money or get lost. He inquired why they weren't afraid that he would report them for trying to extort money from a newbie. The rat-faced shyster's underling began to give him a piece of his mind, but his boss called him off. There was no reason to muddy the water in situations like this. They had already come prepared. They assured him they were only joking and welcomed him into the pavilion to choose his tool. But Fang Xing knew when he heard their sly words that he better keep his eyes peeled, that things weren't right. As he stepped into the pavilion, he realized that there were so many choices. The shysters lit an incense, as all junior brothers only had 1 incense stick's worth of time to make their selection. His time was ticking, so he needed to get going. He pondered his situation as he casually strolled around the pavilion. There were a good 2,000 to 3,000 spiritual tools in the pavilion, and he had no way to judge their quality. He understood now why the rats wanted to take advantage of him. They were merely offering their unjust services. If he just chose at random, the probability of him missing out was just too high. As he stared at a particular sword, a voice in his head informed him that it was a red copper flying sword inscribed with 3 spell formations, and that the tool was damaged. He put on quite a show trying to figure out who had spoken to him. The shysters wondered what was wrong with the kid. As his eyes landed on another item, he was informed that it was the fiery flag. It could release intense fire, and was inscribed with 7 spell formations. It was also damaged. His eyes shifted from the flag to a low-grade flying sword made from extremely fine steel inscribed with 1 spell formation. But it had low spiritual chi. He now understood what was going on. When he looked at an item, the information was directly imparted into his brain by his yin-yang divine demon book. But better than that, he realized that the book was imparting the cultivation levels of the people standing around him. He now understood why the rat-faced guy was so arrogant. He was in his 3rd level of spiritual movement. The game they were playing was completely clear. The only spiritual tools that had been left out were either trash or heavily damaged. The good tools would have been hidden away and only brought out when a new disciple paid an appropriate bribe. But as he realized his predicament, his attention was caught by the sight of a mask. Mask of Wanluo, mid-grade spiritual tool inscribed with 36 spell formations in good condition. It was a spiritual tool for transformation. After wearing it, it could change one's body's shape, appearance, and even chi. The 36 spell formations represent the 36 different types of people one can be transformed into. Such an item was the perfect tool for a thief looking to kill and steal. As he picked the mask up, he was informed that his time was up. The rat-faced shyster was puzzled. He had never seen the worn-out mask in his life. But seeing how it was the kid's choice, he congratulated him and insisted it was time for him to get out. Fong walked away, head held high, chest out proudly. On his first day in the sect, he had duped a bunch of shysters. As he walked away, the group laughed at his expense. They watched the newbie leaving thinking he had obtained treasure. But no one came to their pavilion, disrespected them, and got away with anything good. The rat-faced leader couldn't wait till the newbie returned looking for a replacement. But if he wanted anything from them, he would have to completely throw his dignity out the window. Senior brother Yu examined the mask, not sure what to think. In the end, he decided that Fong had spent way too much time choosing such an item. Fong didn't enlighten him, but he assured his senior brother that he had his own plans. There was nothing he could do about it anyway, so he let it go. The choice had already been made. It was time for Fong to finally be escorted to his new residence. He thought it was about time. He really couldn't wait any longer. After an extended hike through the bamboo forest, they reached their destination. The disciples' homes were nestled up against the mountainside. Fong felt the place was perfectly defensible. A mountain in the back with a river running along the front. Such a setup would be hard to attack by anyone. All they needed to do was build a stronghold, and no amount of soldiers could challenge them. His senior brother thought the little one was insane. He was most definitely forgetting that they were cultivators and such a situation would never arise. He hurriedly pointed out his junior's new dwelling. It was a little empty house right next to his dwellings that would perfectly allow the two to look after each other. And before he forgot, he passed Fong his new items. The book was self-explanatory. Qingyun Refining Qi Book. But the little red spear was another matter entirely. Yu was surprised by Fang's lack of knowledge on the particular item. It was a spiritual stone, a material used for cultivation. It was a building block Fang would rely on to refine his cultivation. The bad news was, as a deer anchor, he was only given one in every 3 months. He had joined this sect because he thought it was the best. To find out that the Qingyun sect were this stingy was a shock to him. Brother Yu broke it down for him. One stone was worth at least 100 gold in the mortal world. And he didn't know a single D-ranker who could go through a full stone in a 3-month span. So, the offering was quite good for their rank. With such an aid at his disposal, Fang rushed off to cultivate. Brother Yu bid him farewell. He was determined to make Fang Xing's first day a good one, the two would have a great celebration with a bottle of wine as soon as he finished his daily tasks. His new abode was bare, but Fong knew he could work with it. Now that he was finally alone, he celebrated his success. This was a big step up from the herb fields. He pulled out his new book and instantly buried his face into it. He found that the book was very similar to the foraging chi book. The basic principles of both was very similar. But this new book was heavy on details. It not only taught you how to sense the flow of chi through your meridians, but it gave full details on how to use the spirit stones to cultivate. Fang set up and retrieved the stone from his stash. He would follow the lessons he learned in the book. As he began the process of meditating, he connected with the stone. And through concentration, the flow of chi intensified. As night fell, he had consumed the stone that was supposed to last him 3 months. But his chi was at a full blaze in a simple lotus pattern. He slowly opened his eyes, ecstatic that with the spirit stone his progress was much faster. But he was disappointed in the longevity of the stone. He had only been cultivating for half a day and it just couldn't keep up with his demands. But now that he tasted the power of the stones, he knew he needed more. He hoped he could count on Fatty to point him in the direction where he could acquire more stones. As he burst through his front door, a shock awaited him. Upon his exit, his senior brother was entering, and not being accustomed to his new strength led him to smash his brother in the face. He had forgotten that the two were going to celebrate with wine. Unfortunately for Brother Yu, everything was timed just perfectly to destroy his nose. But the timing was perfect for Fong. He could inquire about how to obtain more stones, seeing as how one just would not do it for him. Brother Yu was sure he had misheard his junior. There was no way he had gone through a full spirit stone in less than half an afternoon. But in the end, there was nothing wrong with his hearing. Fang assured him that the spirit stones weren't as advertised. He asked his senior brother if he could assist him in acquiring more stones. Or at the very least, point him in the right direction. But Brother Yu was puzzled. Even if he didn't sleep or rest, it would take him at least 10 days to completely use up a spirit stone. Half a day was an insane turnaround. He was truly impressed with himself. Brother Yu shook himself out of the fog. He had never heard of anyone consuming chi at such an accelerated rate. He knew of a place to attain more stones, but passing on such information would be useless to Fang. Fang Xing poured his brother wine, and insisted he should feel free to speak his mind. The game of cultivation was different for people who were influential and wealthy. If you had unlimited money, you could sink a large amount of materials and tools into your cultivation. If the wine did the trick, by the end of the night, Fang would have all the information he needed to progress. So, for people who had the means, there were various other channels to acquire resources. He explained that the most accessible one to a commoner was the black market. Every once in a while, a night would be chosen to open the black market in the deep bamboo forests of the valley. The leaders of the sect actually turned a blind eye to the black market even though it was still against the rules. Because of this, it was kept secret. Individuals who entered the market disguised themselves. And the market's top rule was that money and goods were all that mattered and identities were left at the gate. In the black market, as long as you have the wealth, spirit stones are easy to acquire. But Brother Yu assured Fang that knowing such information was useless, as he wouldn't be able to cough up that amount of money. As a thief, Fang had just hit the jackpot. He inquired when the next black market would open, to Brother Yu's bewilderment. Fang Xing only had one night to prepare. But if everything went well, he would be fully loaded after a night heist of the black market. As he approached the front gate, he noticed that security was lacking. He was happy that they stopped him to inquire about his business. If this was too easy, it wouldn't be fun. His new mask was getting used, and he had only had it for a single day. The information he had farmed from his brother Yu was already paying off. He had come well prepared, ready for all contingencies. His knowledge alone allowed him entry without his belongings being checked. His mask was truly impressive and not only changed his outer appearance, but it had masked his voice entirely. On top of that, it was able to change its appearance to match its environment. Fang Xing announced to the black market that he had arrived. Fong walked around, examining all the merchandise on display. Everywhere you looked, there was someone in the middle of a back alley deal. For a black market, this place was packed to the brim with sellers and buyers. His fourth uncle was an expert in subterfuge. One smoke pot was all he needed to put everyone out for at least 4 hours. But with all the people here, he had no idea how he would accomplish such a goal. But he was in luck. Of seller was making a commotion, attracting the attention of everyone in the black market. He had exactly what they all had come for, and he wanted to process the merchandise as quickly as possible. Many other participants were junior brothers just like him, and they all were there for the very same thing. Spirit stones. He had 90 spirit songs in his possession, and he was offering it at the low price of 80 gold apiece. 20 gold cheaper than you could find it anywhere else. The bag was filled to the brim with the loot Fong was here to acquire. The seller's voice piqued Fong's interest. The Yin-Yang Demon book should allow him to identify the individual without much hassle. Another very familiar voice reached his ears as everyone speculated the reason they were being sold for so cheap. The individual, whose mask did nothing to conceal his presence, stepped forward. He wanted to check the authenticity of the stones. He processed spiritual qi in front of everyone in attendance, stating each of their curiosities. With that out of the way, the pandemonium ensued. The qi of the seller belonged to none other than the rat-faced swindler. It explained why one person could afford so much wealth and be willing to part with it at such a price. He was essentially selling ill-gotten gains back to the very people who he had stolen it from to begin with. To the disappointment of the crowd, the spirit stones went quickly. But he assured them all not to worry. He would be back soon with more merchandise. And at that moment, another seller stepped forward. He had a treasure he was willing to sell for spirit stones or spirit tools. But he doubted anyone there could handle its greatness. From his hand, a golden sword emerged. Most of the onlookers were more impressed with the storage ring he removed the sword from. But the sword was the real deal. It radiated a spiritual qi that was intimidating, to say the least. It had to be at least a mid-grade flying sword. The sword was none other than the 9 Serpents' golden flamed sword. He had procured it before joining the sect. And he had merely outgrown the spiritual tool's usefulness. He was willing to part with it if one of his brothers made an offer he couldn't refuse. The sword had caused him nearly 10,000 gold, and he wasn't willing to part with it for less than 100 spirit stones. 100 spirit stones was out of the range of anyone in attendance. Brother Yu in disguise pleaded with him to lower the price to a more reasonable range. He was really only there to showboat. He didn't expect anyone to be able to afford such a magnificent tool. But to his surprise, an individual stepped forward with a trade that was worth no less than the price of the sword. He pondered if it was true, so the masked Fang removed the item so everyone could take a look. But the senior brother disagreed with the value of the item. While the pot was a spiritual tool, its grade just wasn't very high. Fang assured the crowd that he would show them what a true spiritual tool was. He hyped up the crowd to keep their eyes peeled and to watch the tool very closely. Its true power lied in its subtle ability to get the job done. While everyone leaned in closely to see the wonders of the jar, Fang released the seal. And with a single stroke, all the participants had been entrapped in Fang's cunning snare. The strongest among them thought the gas, but it was of no use. The gas was just too strong for any of them. When it was all said and done, Fang was the only man standing unharmed among the gas. He had used his qi to counteract its effect. A single individual was holding his breath. But Fang's fourth uncle's pot was just too strong. The carelessness of the Qingyan sect's brothers was laughable. Today would be a lesson that none of them will ever forget. In his haste to orchestrate his plan, Fang had forgot about the 2 guards. He chastised himself for becoming rusty. If he didn't handle this situation right, he was a goner. Both of their cultivations were much higher than he could handle. He transformed back, preparing to use all his skills to stall the situation. He opened the attack by releasing the pot. But he knew in such a situation it would take time to activate. So far, things were going well. The two guards were willing to talk, which suited his plans perfectly. As long as they were asking him questions, their time would run out. When they asked who he was, he answered truthfully. He was the Ghost Smoke Valley's great 10th thief. And he had come there to find something that he could use to support his living. But him mentioning his past home was probably a bit much. The stories and rumors had spread far and wide of their senior brother's exploits to destroy that very valley. He was an enemy that the two had to destroy at any cost. If this news got out, their jobs would be on the line, so the two rushed forward, intent on killing the thief with as little effort as possible. Things seemed over for Fong. He had failed in his job to stall for time. He did his best to dodge the blows, but with two enemies he wouldn't last long. The tip of one's blade slid across his throat, drawing blood, and Fong was sure his death was assured. The two had came so close, but their time finally ran out, as the pot activated, sending them both to sleep. He knew his fourth uncle would be pleased that his tool had extended Fang Xing's life for another day. All that was left for him to do was to loot and plunder. And he had all the time he needed to clean them all out completely. The cultivators began to wake up at the break of dawn to the sound of the birds chirping. They had spent the whole night laid out, each and every one of them had been stripped of their valuables. The first to wake up was the senior brother who had possessed the sword of the 9 serpents. When he found out his ring was missing, you could hear his screams clear across the bamboo forest. Fong had rested peacefully in his bed until those very same screams startled him awake. He wasn't too bothered by whatever it was, he had a harvest to peruse. The ring turned out to be highly useful, allowing him to make only one trip without drawing any suspicion. It would now be his designated tool whenever he got the chance to plunder. But the best bonus he received from his black market heist was none other than the sword of the 9 serpents. Fong released his spiritual energy and hopes to activate the sword. But his current cultivation level wasn't nearly enough to awaken it. With the way he was progressing, it wouldn't be long before he'd have full access to its abilities. But now that he had the tools he needed, all that was left for him to do was to cultivate. And cultivate was exactly what he did for the next 3 months. He had grown accustomed to his senior brother, banging on his door day in and day out. The first 2 months flew by, but things became slower and slower as he reached the peak of the first level of spiritual movement. As soon as he reached that goal, the last month was an unbearable crawl, of him forcing his way through spirit stones in an attempt to break through to the second level. But now that he was out, he needed to make a second trip to the black market as soon as possible. He finally decided to give the presence of his senior brother some attention. But as soon as he opened the door, the nagging started up. Brother, you got on him for doing nothing but sleep all day. It wasn't healthy for him to only come out for nourishment and head straight back to bed. His senior brother had did his best to help him with his cultivation. He had encouraged him to tag along to the general supervisor's office to inquire about a job that would allow him to get an extra spirit stone every month. But Fong wasn't interested. Brother Yu was sure that being so lazy at such a young age would not bode well for Fang's future. He was tired of troubling himself. Trying to get his new friend to listen was only giving him a headache. He hoped Fong would at least be interested in the free spirit stone they received once every 3 months. Fong felt he should have led with the information of the free stone. It would have saved him the trouble of having to hear all the nagging. Receiving one free spirit stone was still good in his eyes. Brother Yu was taken aback by the statement. The way his brother spoke, you would think he had a mountain of spirit stones at his disposal. He knew that his piggy brother had loose lips, so it was best if he kept his spirit stone heist to himself. He changed his tone to one of excitement. Receiving one free spirit stone was the best thing ever. When they reached the pavilion, the queue for the D rankers was unbelievably long. If it wasn't for the fact that the stones were precious, it was most definitely a skipper. There was a stark difference in the length of the lines for the different ranks. The people in the B line happily chattered, while the cultivators in the D line were silent. The queues were only there to remind them of their place. As the A line was entirely empty, it could have been used for the D ranks. Like the group of them had chosen their D-ranked aptitude. Brother Yu whispered to Fang that there was only one reason why the line was so long. The black market incident from 3 months ago was the cause of all of this. Fang played dumb, wondering exactly what incident his brother Yu was speaking of. He explained that he had heard a rumor that a mysterious man had destroyed the market and robbed every participant at the market 3 months ago. This was the first time in the history of the black market that something like this had happened. And because no one had any idea who the individual was, the black marketeers were afraid to reopen. From the length of the line, he would say that the rich D-rankers never bothered to receive their free stone once every 3 months. The closure of the black market threw a wrench into Fang's plans. He would have to find another means to get his spirit stone fix. When he finally reached the front of the line, for some reason the elder felt the need to give him advice when he hadn't offered any to the other disciples. He advised him to not go astray and to focus on his cultivation. He bowed to the elder, assuring him that he would redouble his efforts and bring honor to the Qinyan sect. But the elder wasn't flattered by Fang's response. He knew BS when he heard it. The attention of the elder made Fang uneasy. There was no way the old man could have known what he had done. After receiving their stones, Brother Yu became increasingly anxious. His pace was increased as if he wanted to hurry home as fast as possible. Fang picked up on this, inquiring why his brother was so uneasy. He explained they could expect a blockade from the bullies in the sect. If they didn't hurry, it was highly likely they would get beat up and robbed of their spirit stones. Fang wondered why the elders didn't do anything about such troublemakers. It was indeed against the rules, but what elder did he know who would bother with such trifle matters? If the issue was brought to the elders, it would be treated as a small scuffle between disciples. Brother Yu told Fang a horror story of a new disciple who had no background being killed in the Qinyan sect. The incident was deemed to be an accident by the elders, and the murderer was only sentenced to a year of imprisonment. On the surface, Fang pretended to be horrified by the news, but his evil side was thrilled. Such information was invaluable. Brother Yu stopping to tell the story was all the stern-faced bully needed to appear. He wasted no time paying his respect to his senior brother. But words alone wouldn't cut it. A gift needed to be presented. Brother Yu had been furnishing this bully with all of the wages he had been receiving from the general supervisor. He begged to be allowed to keep just one piece. But the bully wasn't interested in bargaining with the coward. And just like he was trained, Brother Yu handed over his spirit stone. The bully was pleased, but instead of going on his way, he made a bad decision. He insisted the kid cough up his spirit stone also. Fang stood there, head down, with his body trembling, doing his best to hold his composure. But the sly bully wasn't having any of it. Brother Yu stepped in, doing all he could for his new friend. The young junior brother was new to the sect and didn't understand the rules yet. He hoped the bully would do him this favor and allowed their junior to pass this one time. The bully kicked Brother Yu in the face. He made sure the piggy knew he wasn't worth his time, so why would he extend a favor to the likes of him? As Fang's senior brother tumbled to a stop, he felt it was time for him to enter the conversation. BS flowed from his lips as he offered up his stone. Senior brother Lu, at a glance, I can already tell that you are a good man with a high level of cultivation and boundless righteousness. With the innocent smile on his face, he offered up his stone and explained that he was new to the sect and would love to get the chance to know all his brothers. The bully easily bought the lines he was fed. The sensibility Fang showed him went a long way. But as he reached for the stone, Fang dropped it to the ground. He hurriedly got down to retrieve it, muttering that he hoped he hadn't broken it. The bully thought the rookie's actions were entertaining. This was the first time he ever heard of a spirit stone being capable of breaking. Fang had orchestrated the perfect position for his opening attack. He lunged forward for a precision dagger attack. Upon hitting his mark, he removed his dagger and retreated backwards. The bully couldn't believe the rookie had the audacity to attack him. Fang responded that a thief should be vigilant at all times. The bully wouldn't be taken advantage of by this kid. He reached into his clothes, but was shocked when he came up empty-handed. But Fang had already confiscated his spirit tool. It was a low-grade flying sword with 7 spell formations inscribed upon it. He apologized for retrieving it, but Fong felt it was worth adding to his collection. As the senior brother processed what was going on, the real battle ensued. Fong dashed forward and kicked him as hard in the face as he had kicked Brother Yu. The senior brother quickly realized that he had lost access to his chi. The little brat had gotten lucky and damaged his core. Brother Yu rushed to Fong's aid, insisting he had to return the spiritual tool immediately. The senior brother had attained it from the tool's pavilion. The elders would come down on him if it was ever found in his possession. Even though the bully wasn't capable of moving, he was capable of running his mouth. He threatened to do damage to the senior piggy for teaming up with such a little bastard. But Fong wouldn't give him the chance to ever accomplish his promises. He realized that the kid may be crazy enough to kill him. His fear forced him to insist that this was a Taoist sect, and such actions would be frowned upon. Fong was surprised that he was aware of the sect he was in. The ambushing he had done prior to all of this told a different story. But Fong promised he would be careful and he would do his best not to kill the senior brother. An agonizing wail could be heard all over the sect by the operation Fong performed. Fong was disappointed in the loot he received from the bully. He had barely had 5 spiritual stones, and the only thing of use he had to return. Brother Yu worried that little Fong had crippled the bully, but he assured him the bully was okay. He had just made sure that it would be a while before the bully was able to retrieve his revenge. It would take his core at least 3 to 5 months to recover from the damage it had received. Brother Yu worried for their safety when their window of reprieve was up. But Fong reassured him when that time rolled around, the fight would be a one-sided fight at best. He passed over 2 of his newly acquired stones, insisting that he always treated his friends well. Fong felt he was finally getting the hang of his new environment. It wasn't much different than any other bandit lair. If you had talent, you bully others. If you don't, you get bullied. Just like anywhere else, this place was a dog-eat-dog world. Brother Yu's admiration for his junior brother shot through the roof. Fong couldn't believe that he didn't already hold his brother's admiration. But Brother Yu was just implying. He knew that Fong wouldn't be a simple person ever since the incident in the herb fields. The two made their way home with their spirit stones safe and secure. The 2 elders continued their leisure games. The eldest inquired about the other's trip down the mountains to distribute spirit stones to the disciples. He insisted that he was only getting fresh air and the change of scenery. But the eldest elder was sure he was only interested in meeting that disciple. He was done with the scrutiny and continued his game. He raised his head, looking to the heavens. His eyes reflected the sight of the 9 mystical tombs floating in space. The spirit stones Fong received from the blockade bully was exactly what he needed to break through to the next level. The second level of spiritual movement had its obvious benefits. Even without using spiritual chi, his body was light as a feather. But the second stage wasn't good enough. He would have to progress further along his cultivation journey if he was going to be ready to defend himself against the bully. Fong wasted no time testing out his progress. He concentrated on the sword of the 9 serpents. As he kept it in his mind's eye, the sword activated. The presence of the serpents were fearsome, overwhelming him with their strength. He could only barely summon them and had no control whatsoever. He would have to become stronger if he wished to use the sword to its full capabilities. He wasn't interested in arguing with Brother Yu, so he hurriedly opened the door. If it wasn't for the wine, he wouldn't have even bothered. Brother Yu brought up a person, high on Fang Xing's list of enemies. Ho Ching was the individual who injured his sister Xiao Man. Brother Yu wanted to warn Fang of the status the individual now held. He was now an A-ranked disciple who the elders believe would break through to the 4th level of spiritual movement within the year. When that happened, he would move on to become an inner sect disciple. Rumors of his prowess had recently been spreading. It was said that a few days ago he was ambushed in the Qixia Valley by 3 disciples of the 3rd level of spiritual movement. Instead of him being taken advantage of, he easily defeated the 3 in a single strike. Brother Yu was surprised when the polite individual he had originally met changed completely once he had become a member of the sect. He recently ran into Ho Ching while performing his duties as an assistant of the general supervisor and was completely ignored, as if he was nothing more than trash. But Brother Yu had also come with news he was sure would interest Fong. In 3 nights' time, the black marketeers would be reopening the market. The black market had clearly learned its lesson. They have bolstered their security presence by 4 times. This time around, Fong was a sassy senior sister that didn't take nonsense from anyone. Because of the recent incident, security wasn't taking any chances. Anyone who entered had to comply with a search of all their belongings. Senior sister Fong had no problem revealing what she brought to the market. Her coin sack was nearly overflowing with gold. Upon seeing it, the guards parted the way and allowed her entry into the black market. His tactics would have to be different this time, as everyone paid full attention to his every move. The reopening drew nothing but high-level veterans this time around. With the disguise of a beautiful lady and the lack of rookies, a heist wouldn't be easily accomplished. The vendor Fong stopped at caught his attention for all the wrong reasons. None of the items the vendor sold were authentic. They were all fakes of the highest quality. The subservient attitude of the vendor wouldn't work in the presence of the great 10th thief. Fong closely examined the vendor's merchandise. All of his items would pass close inspection, and some of the items had a higher quality than their real counterparts. If the black market were to find out, the swindler's life would most definitely be in jeopardy. The seller praised his senior sister on her excellent eyesight, and acknowledged that his judgment had been misplaced. But when Fong ran across talent, he cherished it. He demanded the seller's real name and a favor to be handled later. Fong wasn't interested in the seller's fake ID token he carried on his person. He wanted to see the real McCoy. Huaqianji, rank B, outer sect disciple. Having many favors owed to one was the sign of a skilled thief. Even though Fong had no use for Huaqianji's skills at the moment, having access to a skilled forger could only open avenues of opportunities in the future. A nice-sized crowd was forming. For a thief, a crowd could only mean opportunities, so Fong headed in its direction. An individual who did nothing to hide his presence. Have access to rare demon spirit pills. A single demon pill was worth more than 100 spirit stones. But the individual was only interested in a single regiment to trade for his loot. He was looking for access to the equally rare stone essence powder. Stone essence powder is the essence refined from a large number of spiritual stones. It was essentially raw material for refining breakthrough pills. Such a pill would make it easy to break through the key bottlenecks in the path of cultivation. Those bottlenecks are the 3rd level of spiritual movement to the 4th, the 6th to the 7th, and the 9th to the true spirit. Without such an aid, many people are unable to break through in their whole lifespan. Such items were highly guarded secrets that were strictly regulated by the sect, making it nearly impossible to source, even on the black market. It was a pure tool of control used by all aristocratic families. It allowed them to control the fate of cultivators the world over. Fong could tell that the barely disguised individual was stuck at the peak of the 3rd level of spiritual movement. But he knew if stone essence powder was to appear on the black market would be shuttered for good. Fong decided this was an opportunity that he couldn't pass up. He informed the individual to remain silent and to follow his lead. When a senior sister asked you to follow her, what choices do you have? From the moment Fong laid his eyes on the individual, he knew it was his enemy, Ho Ching. The opportunity to get revenge on the attacker of his little sister wouldn't come around often. As soon as he opened his mouth, Fong couldn't miss the rare opportunity to slap him across the face. He chastised the idiot for blatantly putting the black market at risk. If word got back to the sect elders, all of them would be done for. The fool reluctantly apologized his senior sister for his impotence, but insisted he needed the stone essence powder. Fong assured him that he could obtain the powder, but doing so would be a burden that was just too big. Fong insinuated that such a task would jeopardize the livelihood of her family. As Fong assumed, the slip of his tongue did the trick. His enemy believed him to be a part of a high aristocratic family. To sweeten the pot, Fong insisted one pill wasn't enough for the risk he would have to take. He was sure he could take the desperate loser for all he had. 4 pills was the asking price, and it was up to the loser to accept or decline. He could care less either way. But the loser's desperation shined through. In order for him to give her 4 pills, he would need some time to procure them. Fong agreed that that was only natural, for she also would need time to obtain the stone essence powder. The senior sister agreed the two would meet in 9 days on the hill outside of Huang Valley. She would clap 3 times to signal him of her arrival. And with that, the senior sister disappeared without a trace. Fong headed back to the black market. His need for the forger was going to come sooner rather than later. She informed the swindler that she will be sending someone to him the very next day. And for him not to worry, for when the time came, she would take very good care of him. Now wasn't the time to discuss details, so he would have to wait until they were presented in a more private environment. On the way out of the market, Fong made sure to greet the guards and thank them, for their presence brought her great comfort. The swindler sat in his home restlessly waiting for the senior sister to approach him. With his livelihood on the line, he had to accomplish whatever task she presented him. Just as she promised, someone approached his home the very next day. Seeing as how he wasn't going to be easily taken advantage of, he snatched the little brat up and pulled him inside his residence. His interrogation of the little brat only caused him to wet himself. As he puddled on the floor, he knew this child was nothing more than a pawn in the senior sister's plan. If the brat had no information, he was of no use to the swindler. So, he merely casted him aside. As the swindler opened his letter, the brat relayed the message that if the swindler was able to accomplish the task in the latter, that he would be greatly rewarded. But if he wasn't, she had no problem snitching. And the little brat disappeared before he could be assaulted again. As he read what he was to accomplish, such a task only shocked him. If he was ever caught producing the fake of this item, he was sure he wouldn't have much left to worry about. 9 days later, he had accomplished his goal. To the delight of his senior sister, the fake was identical in all the qualities that mattered. Its feel, its color, and its smell would fool any casual observer. The swindler's past experience in the alchemy workshop had come in handy. Because of this experience, he had handled stone essence powder on several occasions, allowing him to accomplish his task just as the senior sister's deadline was up. He was sure that no one other than the senior sister could spot the difference between the real or the fake article. Fong wasted no time approaching the rendezvous location, only to be startled by a black cat in the middle of the night. Her enemy approached her, insisting she was 2 hours overdue. She assured him she never stated she herself would meet him at midnight. Fong knew the drop his enemy had just gotten on him showed how big the gap in the two's cultivation was. He would need to be careful around this ruthless individual. And just as he suspected, a standoff ensued between the two. His enemy Ho Ching was going to attempt to take the dust by force. But the smooth tongue of the senior sister weren't the only tools at Fang's disposal. Ho Ching insisted among the thousands of disciples, there was no chance she would ever find him once they left this location. If she handed over the powder, he had no problems with her leaving with her life. Fong presented the stone essence powder and informed Ho Ching that he couldn't seriously believe she had no idea who he was. The mere mention of his name gave him pause. He had no choice but to destroy the senior sister before him. His deadly sword formation would make quick work of her, and leave no evidence to be found. With a single finger, Fang dispelled the great attack of the Qingyan sect's top disciple. The only damage he received was the appearance of a few drops of blood. Ho Ching called off his attack, for he understood that his identity being known put him at a great risk. Fang assured him that it was laughable to think that her standings in society wouldn't allow her to know exactly who he was. If he laid a single finger on her, it wouldn't take more than 24 hours for him to regret such a decision. Being the great 10th thief, Fang knew the exact moment to add fuel to the fire, standing in front of him. He brandished the sword of the 9 serpents, unleashing the beasts of which it held. The action assured her enemy that the senior sister standing before him wasn't a pushover. She reassured him she was only interested in trading and that her actions were only to show him that while she may lack the cultivation level, she didn't lack a powerful spiritual tool. Her actions impressed him. She wasn't the dumb daughter of a rich family that he originally believed. She not only investigated his identity, but she came prepared to defend herself. Ho Ching knew when he had been outdone and wasted no time apologizing, while doing his best to save face. Fang, disguised as the senior sister, had no interest in him prostrating himself before her. They had both come here for business, and they should see it done. Fang had no problems relinquishing the stone essence powder. As Ho Ching examined it, she reassured him that it wasn't a fake. But the expertise of the forger was all that was needed. He could sense that the powder was indeed real. He passed over the demon pills, completing the back alley transaction. Fang left the heavy-handed senior brother with a piece of advice: if he continued to do business the way he did tonight, sooner or later, such actions would only cause him trouble. He couldn't easily reverse. And before he could respond, Fang vanished, leaving Ho Ching high and dry. He had never come across a cultivator with such average cultivation capable of vanishing without a trace. As he stood there pondering the events that had just taken place, he seemed to gather each bit of information he felt was useful. A key detail struck him hard. He had knowledge of a sword that possessed all the qualities of the one he had just witnessed. The sword of the 9 serpents was the very sword that the thief had lifted from the black market a few months ago. And that led him to realize that he too had just been robbed. He screamed his frustrations into the night sky. Third-class demon spirit pill, refined from the inner pill of a third-rank demonic beast, and 9 kinds of elixirs. Contains spiritual energy, can be used by cultivators to progress their spiritual movement. Fong was impressed. He had obtained the real deal and wasted no time popping all 4 pills into his mouth. As soon as they were swallowed, the Yin-Yang Divine Demon Book informed him under no terms were the pills to be swallowed directly. The appropriate way to process the pills is to place one under the tongue and to meditate until the pill had been dissolved into your system. Otherwise, spiritual chi would explode in your system, assuring you a quick departure from this world. At those words, Fong began to panic. How dare his demon book not informed him of the ramifications sooner? As the spiritual chi began to release, it lit him up from the inside out. He was being cooked from his core outwards. His last thoughts as he began to fade from this world was, how could he die so stupidly? Upon his death, one of the 9 mystical tombs activated and forced itself out of orbit. It entered Earth's atmosphere like a meteor, burning up, as it headed straight to the Qingyun outer sect. A certain elder quietly meditated, pleased that history was finally beginning. Fang slowly drifted farther and farther away from the mortal realm, only to awaken in pure agony as the mystical tomb beelined it in his direction. The commotion drew the attention of the disciples all over the sect. His spiritual chi was inflamed as it exploded from his body. But the gentle hands of a divine being carefully, and slowly, led him from the cusp of destruction. He was transported to a spiritual plane. Under an elder sakura tree, a beautiful goddess nurtured him. Her words helped him through his transition. With hair of white spanning 3,000 yards, with the revered one's spiritual sculpture. The spirit veins shift and defy their course. Through the refining of spirit, chi will flow, consuming the earth and plundering the heavens. Fang shot awake with the words "Mom" leaving his lips. He had no idea what had happened. All he knew is he was now at the peak of the 2nd level of spiritual movement. Instead of dying, he had absorbed all 4 pills. All he could think was that the Yin-Yang Divine Demon Book had pulled through for him once again. He faintly remembered the beautiful lady, and he had no idea why he felt the need to call her mom. His senior brother could always find the perfect time to barge in on him. Fong was surprised he was carrying wine. The two had only just indulged themselves the night before. His words only confirmed to his senior brother that he had been oversleeping once again, causing Fong to laugh it off as he invited his brother inside. But Brother Yu was instantly hit by a stench that caused a rainbow of puke to erupt from his mouth. As Fong took a sniff, questioning the absurdity of his home smelling, he too joined the rainbow parade. Fong bathed in the beautiful springs of the mountain. He had now experienced the phenomenon of cultivation purging filth from the body. He assumed the Yin-Yang Divine Demon book had copied a new cultivation method known as the spiritual sculptor of the revered to his mind, while he slept. Seeing as how it was most likely the cause of him pulling through his deadly situation, he would be thorough when he combed through the text. Upon hearing the call that his room had been cleaned, he hurriedly rushed home. Brother Yu had a good time teasing him over wetting the bed. Fong was sure that rumors of this would spread, even as his senior brother reassured him otherwise. Brother Yu realized if his junior brother had been out for a few days. He had no idea of the major events taking place in the sect. Fong was sure it had to do with a certain Ho Ching being taken for all he had. To his surprise, it wasn't Ho Ching himself who had been robbed, but someone who brought it to his attention. For the justice of the individual, Ho Ching decided to use his own resources to find the thief among the outer sect disciples. They believe the thief to be a senior sister who's capable of changing her appearance. A few days ago he gathered together a mob that went door to search for any clues. Brother Yu informed Fong that his home was searched, but he was sleeping like a baby at the time. The story made Fong realize that the satchel that was holding the demon spirit pills was nowhere to be found. Even so, he searched everywhere to no avail, ripping his house apart in the process. He couldn't believe he was going to be brought down by such a small error. But once again, luck was on his side. Ho Ching was furious. His team had finally uncovered a clue, but none of them remembered where they found it. The bag wasn't part of their original search, so they had no idea of its importance. They implored their young master to understand. If they had only known, they would have been more careful. He decided he wasn't going to get bent out of shape over this. But as he was dismissing his man, he ordered them to refrain from calling him young master. If anyone overheard them, rumors would spread of them being his servants. Going forward, they were to call him senior brother, seeing as how they were also disciples of the sect. The three bowed to him and left his presence. A beautiful woman known as Qingxue entered the room as his servants left. He confided in her that this year's talisman edict was causing him immense stress. His failure to attain the stone essence powder meant his only way forward was to accomplish this year's edict. The beautiful woman insisted there had to be another way to obtain the breakthrough pill. For this year's edict was several times more difficult than any in the past had ever been. She knew that it was all because of her that his timetable was accelerated. If the two of them was going to work, he had to break through as soon as possible. He reassured her not to worry. He had a plan that would assure he returned safely regardless of the outcome of the edict. As Fong continued to ransack his home, an unfamiliar knock caught his attention. To his surprise, he had a visitor who was a few months early. He cast his doors wide open to greet the unwelcomed intruder. Senior brother Lu assured him that he wasn't the one looking for him. At the sight of Ho Ching, Fong rested his hand upon his dagger. But as he did his best to conceal his presence in plain sight, the A-ranker only seemed to be interested in his current cultivation level. He spoke up, informing them that his name was Fang Xing and he was in the first level of spiritual movement. Fong could clearly see that Lu was orchestrating a plan to get rid of him. Ho Ching agreed while his level was a bit low, he would be the perfect member to include in his endeavor. The two didn't even bother asking if he wished to join their team. They merely tossed him a sack with his pay and assured him that more would come in the future. With one relief out the window, a new worry was arising. He was relieved to find that Ho Ching was so full of himself that he couldn't be bothered to memorize the faces of people below him. Fong did his best to get out of whatever dangers they were trying to entrap him in. But his senior brother Lu grabbed him and insisted he shouldn't show his elders such disrespect. In this situation, Fong had to stay calm. He couldn't act on his instincts to tear his senior brother apart. The senior brother was counting on this one fact, hoping that even the little vermin knew his place in the presence of ultimate strength. Seeing as his elders were insistent, he had no choice but to agree to join this year's edict. Senior brother Lu got rid of his biggest problem and made a killing in the process. Fong drank his wine as his brother Yu let out all his frustrations. going over everything Fang already knew. Yes, he knew it was a trap. Yes, he knew failure was the equivalent of death when it came to the Talisman Edict. But what choice did he have? His cultivation level and background wasn't high enough to tell either of them no. Fang inquired whether it was wise to seek help from the elders of the sect. But Brother Yu was sure he wouldn't receive help in that direction. The elders of the sect held control of the breakthrough pill for the exact purpose of forcing the disciples into the Talisman Edict. He doubted they would care that Fong was being forced to join an expedition. Brother Yu had a plan. If Fong couldn't be found, he couldn't go on the expedition. For this, all he had to do was run away. And his piggy brother had learned the perfect escape route to the outside world while working for the general supervisor. The entrance was in the bamboo forests on the west side of the valley. He was sure they could bypass any surveillance their enemies had set up to prevent Fang's escape. Fong thanked his senior brother for the concern. But he wouldn't be running away. The two of them came from different backgrounds, so he doubted his brother understood. There was no use trying to escape in a world where the strong dominated the weak. Your best course of action is always to face it head on. Rumors of the senior brother's plan had already spread among the Qinyan sect. As the group galloped to retrieve their last member, onlookers wondered who exactly the lucky individual among them was. Fong was ready and waiting. He wasn't going to make a big deal out of this. He was determined to turn this situation in his favor. Just looking at Fong, Ho Ching was sure he had changed in the span of a single night. He was probably only imagining it, so he invited Fong to climb aboard. The crowd was shocked that the lucky individual was a small child. They speculated his background had to be the reason he was chosen. Senior brother Lu had prepared multiple countermeasures to make sure things went according to plan. That included keeping a close eye on the piggy brother himself. He assured him that once the vermin was gone, he would be next in line to be dealt with. As the group galloped out of the sect, Fong inquired about the details surrounding their mission. Ho Ching informed him their mission was to subdue demons. Assuming the mere mention of demons would frighten the small child, Fong did his best to play the part, innocently inquiring the type of demons in question. The one-eyed disciple explained the reason no one dared take this year's Talisman Edict was because the target of this year's hunt was none other than the fourth-ranked demonic beast, known as the Python Toad. The group of 5 made camp at the base of the very mountain where the demon resided. Fang's pretense innocent nature had garnered him a guardian in the one-eyed servant. As he pretended to act his age, putting his fear on display for everyone to witness, his new friend passed him the wine skin, insisting one sip would run the fear away. After chugging down the liquid, the others laughed as he coughed up the foul fluids. Ho Ching ordered that they not get carried away. All of them needed to be at their best to head into the mountains before the sun rose into the sky. His servants still hadn't got used to his new titles as young master slipped from their tongue once again. Fong wouldn't be getting much sleep tonight, as intel gathering was his top priority if he was going to survive this ordeal. His consumption of the wine made for loose lips all around the fire. As they believed him to be out cold, he had an easy time picking up how exactly he fit in all of this. Everyone around the fire knew that Lu San, Fang's new guardian, had grown attached to the young boy. He could see in Fang's eyes the hardships the young boy had faced at the hands of bullies in the sect. And he knew the young man felt them to be his greatest supporters. He wasn't interested in losing such admiration. Ho Ching assured him there was no other way. They had to use the young boy as bait to give them the advantage they needed to destroy the demon. His brothers couldn't help but tease him. He had always been a soft one. He shouldn't have gotten attached. The young boy's sacrifice would limit the risk all of them would face going into this edict. Lu San understood he was wrong to have gotten attached to the young fellow. The preparations for their plans was complete. They had a specialty tool that would destroy Fang's sea of qi, forcing his spiritual qi to leak out, making him an irresistible treat to the Python Toad. All it took was for the uncaring brother to stab the young boy 18 times in his most abundant acupuncture points. It was a task the ruthless brother was very much looking forward to. Fong listened on, intent on catching every detail. The ruthless brother knew the demon's preference very well, young boys who had cultivated before was at the top of his list of treats. Fang's cries of pain would serve their purpose very well, drawing the demon into an ultimate trap. Ho Ching warned that these miasma-covered mountains were treacherous at best. Because of this, all of them needed to be meticulous, moving forward. All the servants agreed openly, using the title Young Master. Staying up so late snooping had gotten to Fong. He was forcibly awoken early the next morning. The group was already up and ready to move out. Everything from here onwards would be done on foot, as the horses wouldn't be convenient in the treacherous demon miasma mountains. The look on Fong's face was enough for his guardian to explain the story in full. Hundreds of years ago, a great demon in the Foundation establishment stage fiercely guarded these mountains. A single cultivator struck down the demon, but also perished in the conflict. All the spiritual power left behind by the death of the two powerful figures caused beasts of the third and fourth stage to endlessly spawn, leading the mountains to eventually be known as the Demon Miasma Mountains. The python toad were hunting is the strongest demon in recent history. The mountains were entering or treacherous in the best of times. It's packed with all forms of demons. It doesn't take but a single mishap for an entire group to lose their life. Fong was impressed by such a story, leaving his guardian confused by the child's amazement. Senior brother Lu San tossed Fong the wine sack. With endearing words, he encouraged the boy to increase his wine tolerance with the bag if he found a way to return to the sect alive. Fong watched him return to the others, thankful to have met such a kind senior brother. As he shook the tears from his eyes, he rushed to catch up with the group. The mountain was indeed treacherous. At every turn there was some beast consuming the life of another's. They came across a giant snake that had cleaned the bones of an unfortunate human being. And before the snake could fully digest his meal, he was squished by the giant python toad. As the group cut their way through the mountains, that very same toad took interest in their progress. As they hacked their way into the dense mountain, the heat was unbearable, pulling down the weak members of their team. They had no idea why the mountain was so hot, but the lake up ahead was seriously enticing. Ho Ching had been pushing them hard for several days. Being able to rest next to a cool lake wasn't an opportunity his underlings wanted to miss. Fong wasted no time taking a load off. As he was being watched over by his guardian, the malicious member of the team felt this was the perfect opportunity to wash up. As he rushed to jump in, Lu San tackled him to the ground. He thought his brother had gone crazy, but it was him who had indeed lost his mind. The lake's water was infested with dangerous creatures. If he took a dip, he would be dead in seconds. To prove his point, senior brother Lu removed the head of a nearby snake and tossed it in. Within moments, a group of piranha, who were invisible to the eye, turned red and attacked their meal. The little piranha were only able to be seen when they began to hunt. Otherwise, they were undetectable to the naked eye. As the bones of the snake washed up on shore, the two reckless brothers knew that could have easily been them. They both should know not to question Lu's advice when it comes to these mountains. He's the only hunter the world over who's known to frequently visit these mountains. Seeing as how he has always managed to return home, his expertise should be taken as fact. Fong knew from the very start that Lu San was someone worthy of befriending, and he very much hoped that the decision was a wise one. Ho Ching called Lu San over to have a private conversation. He encouraged his servant to be cautious around the boy as they got closer to their destination. Lu San didn't understand his master's concern. The boy was nothing more than a simple ordinary kid. Ho Ching upped the ante, threatening his servant not to fail him in his time of need. He could understand the attachment the man had to the child, but he should be more worried about his own little brother, his blood and flesh. Lu San understood the threat and would act accordingly. When he returned to Fong, he wasn't entirely truthful about the conversation he had just had. He only let him know that they were about to reach their destination and brother Ho Ching wanted him to be more responsible for Fang's care. As they prepared to move out, Fong sensed a change in his new friend. As they marched onward, he knew the time was nearing where they would make their move. Fong knew the marginal of error of his plans didn't leave him much room for mistakes. Ho Ching signaled the start of the operation. His malicious servant had been ready to dispose of the kid for a while. Fong couldn't believe the group was being so direct with their actions. As Ho Ching ordered them to carefully avoid the swamp, Fong knew he would get no better opportunity. And that moment, he set his plans into motion. The scrap of his wine sack snapped, and the young Fong dived in after it. The group rushed to help the little brat, knowing they couldn't lose him just as the operation began. Lu San was the first to reach him, holding Fong's wrist tightly. If they weren't careful, he would easily be pulled under. The quick actions of the team pulled a Fong, who stunk from head to toe, out of the swamp. Lu San saw the treacherous look on his master's face and slapped Fong to head him off. He chastised Fong, ensuring him that if it wasn't for him, he would be dead now. Fong assured him next time he would pay more attention. But his brother Lu only made the regretful comment that there wouldn't be a next time as he dropped his head and sadly walked away. Fong's plan only bought him a temporary reprieve. As they reached their destination, Ho Ching ordered his servants to proceed with the plan. Fong used his bladder to buy him the space he needed to work. He was ordered to be careful while he relieved himself. He wouldn't want to fall in and feel the wrath of the man-eating fish. And of course, the malicious brother followed, eager to do his work. As the two stood at the lake, proceeding to do their business, the killer fished for a few key answers. First, he found out that Fong was an orphan. Then he did his best to blow up the kid's head, ensuring him in time he would make a name for himself in the Qingyan sect. He informed Fong of the reason Lu San was so affectionate towards him. He had a younger brother, very close in age to Fong, who was seriously ill. None of them knew if the kid could be cured, but Lu San was trying his best to provide the care his little brother needed. Fong asked his senior brother why he was telling him all of this. But the brother had no idea either. He could only assume it was because he wanted to send the boy to his death in peace. Upon those words, Fong jumped into motion, disappearing from sight and reappearing to plunge his dagger in his senior brother's back. Luckily, this brother wouldn't be easily taken out. He reversed the flow of his dagger towards Fong's head, only to have Fong viciously attack his elbow. Fong stood over the body of the vicious senior brother, waiting for the others to make their move. Ho Ching sent an attack hurtling in the brat's direction, only to watch helplessly as the kid phased away at the last second. When he reappeared, he rushed forward, forcing his injured enemy into the treacherous water. It only took a few moments for the show to begin. And the vicious piranha didn't disappoint. The frenzy attracted the attention of a few other opportunistic predators. But I doubt there would be much left in only a few moments. Ho Ching wasn't fooled for a second. He could see right back to the moment the kid started to plan his escape. However, the other two were surprised to see only one set of remains float to the surface. Fong rose out of the lake and swam to the other side. As he reached dry land, he turned around and gave them the signal that they too were next. Ho Ching knew his instincts were right as he watched on in horror. Loyal brothers, indeed. It didn't take them long to strap Lu San to a tree. They were sure he gave the kid all the tools he needed to escape. But Lu San insisted while he empathized with the child, he would never betray the family. The fool's servant, interrogating his brother, hyped himself up so much he proceeded to finish the job only to be stopped by their young master. Ho Ching knew Lu San wasn't a traitor. Their mistake came in underestimating the small cultivator. A light investigation was all that was needed to figure out why Fong escaped the clutches of the piranha. The mud his body was covered in had been infused with the chi of the fourth-ranked demonic python toad. It explained why the piranha shied away from the kid's presence as he swam across the lake. It meant the extraction point of their target was none other than the swamp. Ho Ching said it all out plainly. The kid had to be capable of sensing the demonic energy in the swamp. Understanding that it would protect him from other predators, he faked his fall to cover himself in the demonic mud. Lu San was terrified at the meticulousness of the little brother. He used his appearance to lure them all into a trap. As Lu San thought back over all his encounters with the kid, he decided to do his best to ensure the kid's safety. As he insisted the kid was long gone, his master interrupted him, informing him that that was likely not the case. The kid's last gesture and facial features wasn't one of a coward intent on running away, instead it was one of a beast looking for revenge. Fong was shocked at how fast the demonic mud disappeared from his body. If he hadn't been quick, he would have been a goner. He was only able to accomplish his plan thanks to the Yin-Yang Divine Demon Book. If it hadn't informed him of the properties of the mud, his escape would have been impossible. As night fell, he promised himself he would kill them all. He snuck into his enemy's camp, not expecting the trap that awaited him. He was surprised they weren't on guard as he ninja'd in, dagger in hand. But his true surprise came when he activated a booby trap that nearly took off his head. He couldn't believe he was so careless to fall for such an obvious trap. His eagerness to be done with them put him in the dangerous situation where he would be facing his enemies head on. If he tried to flee, he knew the three would easily pin him down. So he chose to attack from the front to give him the opportunity to escape. He rushed straight towards the strongest enemy. As the two collided, his dagger was easily destroyed in the process. He now knew firsthand the gulf of power that separated the two. Ho Ching realized the kid was full of surprises. To have reached the peak of the second level of spiritual movement at such a young age was astonishing. If he was allowed to stay in the sect for a few more years, the young master could only imagine the heights he would reach. Unfortunately, that option wasn't available to him any longer. Fong had no idea that the peak of the second level would be destroyed so easily by the peak of the third. The two levels were like night and day. But the group kept making careless mistakes around the little thief. As the senior brother tied him down and threatened him that he soon would become minced meat, the cunning little Fong struck again. This time with the specialty dagger of their old friend. He plunged the dagger into his enemy's neck and wasted no time rushing away. Ho Ching couldn't believe their luck at obtaining the worst possible bait. After the group attempted to assist their brother, he insisted they had no time. They had to rush after the kid immediately. Ho Ching was positive they had no chance of catching the kid, regardless of his injury. He was just too crafty with who knows how many tricks up his sleeve. For now they would regroup. He was sure they would get another chance at the little demon. Their brother was out of harm's way, but there was a more serious matter. The dagger the kid used meant he would be useless for at least half a month. Ho Ching upped his appreciation for the kid. But now they were out of bait and down another servant. Their best course of action would be to return to the set to regroup. But that wasn't going to be an option. To return only meant they failed. And they wouldn't be given another opportunity. The young master Ho Ching wouldn't ever give up. He felt it was best if he made sure Lu San was appropriately motivated. Lu San assured them it was impossible to track the kid in these mountains. His little brother's illness was none other than tuberculosis. The incurable condition meant he needed to receive regular medicine. If we fail this mission, I will make sure the family dissolves your contract. He argued that the contract stated that as long as he followed the young master and obeyed his orders, the medicine his younger brother needed would always be provided to him. He knew his family best. Lu San was only contracted to help with the talisman edict. If they failed, the elders of his family wouldn't tolerate a worthless contract. Ho Ching also couldn't fail this edict. His family had an arrangement in place for the moment he returned with his tail between his legs. If they couldn't use the kid as bait, then he was left with no choice but to use his wounded servant. As he made sure their bait couldn't escape, he ordered Lu San to place him before the python toad. Neither of them had a choice in the matter. Both their futures depended on the completion of this mission. They waited all night for the demonic toad to appear, only to have a different enemy saunter into their camp as the sun rose. Fang Xing was back to confront his senior brother Lu San, with a shiny dagger in hand. Fang made small talk, wondering how his senior brother knew of his presence. Lu San was serious and was determined to finish this. It turned out the wineskin he was carrying would allow Lu San to track the young Fang Xing, as long as he remained in the demon miasma mountains. Fang wondered why he had lied to Ho Ching the night before, only for his friend to remove a sack and break its contents. Lu San insisted that he alone was all that was needed to capture the slippery beast. The spirit tool that was given to him by the family would give him the temporary strength he needed to hunt the brat down. Fong was disappointed in the actions of his friend. Waiting for the python toad to appear during the night had proving to them that their current bait wasn't up to snuff, leaving only one option available to them. He rushed towards Fame, intent on capturing him. Fong did his best to talk his way out of the situation. As he received blow after blow, he insisted his life was worth more than to be cast aside as bait. Lu San wasn't proud of his actions, but he had his own reasons. With a paralyzed right hand, the task before him was going to be difficult. But he faced it head on, rushing towards his enemy at an opportune time. He threw a kick that was sure to end the situation. But Lu San unleashed a swift attack that cut through the surrounding trees and sent Fong flying. The blow he received left him in terrible condition. But to his enemy's surprise, Fong summoned a flying sword that would be impossible to dodge. As the smoke cleared, he wondered if he had succeeded. But battered and bruised, his enemy stood fast, wondering who exactly this kid was. Fong cared deeply for his new senior brother. Fong assured him there was no reason for the two of them to battle to the death. He should stand aside and allow him to kill Ho Ching. But Lu San's responsibilities were too great for him to allow himself to fail. He apologized to his new friend and released a concealed weapon. Fong released his dagger the moment he sensed the danger. But he had no idea if his countermeasures would be enough. Lu San was the sole caregiver of his little brother after his family was forced to work for the Ho family. His little brother despised the Ho family. He knew that they were bad people that occupied their lands and assaulted the people of the village. He agreed that the Ho family was treacherous. But they were the only ones who had the medicine they needed. When his brother was healed, he would teach him the fine art of drinking and hunting. Even so, his younger brother didn't wish for bad things to be done for his sake. He knew if his brother was to get better, he couldn't have such thoughts filling his brain. So he promised he would never stoop to their level, and only hunt prey for the Ho family. The two rushed forward to have a snowball fight, intent on their final moments together being one they could always remember. His little brother was insisting that he be treated as an equal. He wanted his brother to give him everything he had. As the two gave it their all, the daggers converged in opposite directions. As the snowball fight continued, crocodile tears ran down his brother's face. And at that moment, he knew he had never been good at lying. To Fang's horror, the dagger pierced his new brother through the chest. He couldn't believe this was happening. His senior brother's dagger had squarely hit the wine skin. Fang rushed to the side of his senior brother, knowing he had deliberately missed his target. Ho Ching knew the moment Lu San had failed, he couldn't wait any longer and decided to push ahead with the bait he had. As he proceeded to injure his servant, a dagger intercepted his blow. Fong was there to confront the young master's treacherous behavior. Ho Ching stood with his back to Fong. He knew the young monster would never retreat. And he was sure his servant had died by the hands of the tiny beast. Fong reassured him it was never his intent to harm his friend. But Lu San was persistent to the very end. Ho Ching was done with this conversation. He only wondered why Fong dared face him. Did the kid seriously think he had a chance to defeat him? Fong nonchalantly replied, "What made him think he was alone?" And at that moment, the injured servant rushed into attack, easily blocking his young master's first attack. Ho Ching quickly realized that his servant's wounds were beginning to recover. The long and short of it was the dagger used to seal his chi had a unique set of rules. The effect only persisted in the state of continuous bleeding. Throughout the night, he had slowly recovered. Until the child came along and gave him a weapon to defend himself. Ho Ching was truly unbelievable. After all he'd done, he thought his servant was foolish enough to fight for him once again. And worse than that, the kid's way of thinking was so frightening, he had to make sure he never returned to the sect. The servant knew he would never be allowed to live. If his master was allowed to kill the kid, he was sure he would be next. Ho Ching was surprised, but he knew his servant was right. His biggest regret was ever listening to that fool Lu Fong. If he had known the kid was so fearsome, he would have never chose him for this task. But as it was too late for that, he decided to attack. The servant rushed in, warning Fang to be wary of the sword in his right hand. But the two had no choice but to attack immediately. Fang equipped his ally with the halberd, and dashed forward with the sword of the 9 serpents. Ho Ching blasted away from Fang, choosing to deal with his servant first, leaving Fang behind as he cut the so-so traitor down. Fang watched on as his opportunity for revenge began to slip away. Fang was running straight towards Ho Ching, and wasn't able to see his attack at all. Qing Feng's sword, mid-grade spirit tool that can make the wielder's body move like the wind, but it will harm their spiritual meridians and damage their cultivation. The moment Fang realized what kind of monster he was dealing with, he knew he stood no chance in the face of an enemy willing to damage themselves for victory. As Ho Ching raised into the air, Fang knew what was coming next. Like a ghost, Ho Ching was upon him. Fear consumed every inch of Fang's being, causing him to release the fire of his sword at full blast. He now knew his actions were foolish. He had no choice but to slip away in the midst of the explosion. Like the wind, his enemy was in front of him. Fang was stubborn, unwilling to come to terms with the truth before his eyes. He called forth the 9 serpents, golden flames sword, and cast it towards his enemy. Ho Ching was sure he had seen this sword before. Fang assured him he was asking way too many questions. Ho Ching took the blow of the sword head on and redirected its trajectory in the path of the retreating Fang. It spiraled towards him, slicing his cheek as it crashed directly in his path. Since escape wasn't an option, Fang had no other choice. He removed his blade from his back. Slicing his hand open, as his blood scattered everywhere, he infused it with his qi. Ho Ching watched unpuzzled, but if Fang couldn't escape, the two of them would just have to die together. Ho Ching was very thankful for the consideration of the young man. As soon as he finished off this troublemaker, his true enemy wouldn't be far behind. Fang laughed as he realized the young master had never hunted toads before. There's nothing faster than a toad hunting its prey. And as if on cue, a shadow appeared above the two of them. The sheer force of its landing sent them both flying away from the impact zone. The giant toad appeared as miasma rose from its back, clouding the field they stood in with purple mist. The sight of the creature was astonishing. It stood head and shoulders above them. Python toad, 4th-ranked demonic beast, is a mixed blood species of python and toad, and can spray poison mist. It has python armor, and non-divine weapons cannot injure it. Fang felt the best course of action was to team up with his enemy. But Ho Ching had other plans. He was sure the toad wasn't after him, so he could just fly away and patiently wait for the toad to swallow Fang whole. As he flew away on his sword, he called farewell to his junior brother. A smile crept across Fang's face as the toad's tongue shot out, ensuring it wouldn't lose a single morsel of its meal. Ho Ching's flying sword was knocked from his feet. He dived to recover it, only barely retrieving it, as the frog whipped him with his tongue, sending him flying to the earth. The fool didn't understand what he had done wrong. The toad's obvious target was standing right next to it, covered in the blood that had summoned it. But Fang had guessed the toad was more python than toad the moment he saw the creature's eyes. Fang knew the habits of a lot of creatures, and when it came to snakes, all you had to do was stay still and it would be drawn to any moving target. Seeing as how his senior brother still had no clue, he was going to sit back and watch the show. Ho Ching dashed forward with his blade protecting his progress. He jumped upon the tongue of the demon and landed a blow directly to its skull. The toad let out a high-pitched croak. With such a force, it forced them both back. Luckily, his sword was capable of piercing the hide of the beast. But the sword's body wouldn't last long if it kept coming in contact with the corrosive blood of the beast. Ho Ching took a page from Fang as he hadn't realized that the beast was releasing poison into the air. Ho Ching was sure the toad's bag of tricks had ran empty. But to both their shock, it had one trick left up its sleeve as it sucked them both towards its mouth. Ho Ching's family had supplied him with all the spiritual tools he needed to accomplish his task. Fang was shocked as a chain whipped from his hand and wrapped around a tree, pulling him to safety. He knew this time that his farewell to junior brother Fang would stick. With no way of stopping what was happening, Fong plummeted into the belly of the beast. Ho Ching was now rid of the irritating brat. With that out of the way, his next target was the demonic toad himself. Fong wouldn't last long in the highly corrosive environment he now found himself imprisoned in. If he hadn't been using his qi to sustain his life over the past 2 days, he could easily deal with the target from the inside. But as it stood, he didn't even have enough spiritual qi to summon the 9 serpents' golden flame sword. And once his spiritual qi was gone, he would quickly be dissolved, leaving nothing behind for anyone to find. As the thought ran through his mind that all he needed was a spiritual elixir, a light bulb went off and his escape plan was set in motion. Outside, Ho Ching wasn't having a good time of it. The toad was completely dominating him, and his sword was nearing the end of its usefulness. Without his chain whip, he would have been long destroyed. But at this critical moment, he had no choice but to give it his all. He forced his qi into his chain and whipped it into the mouth of the demon toad. While its tongue lashed him across the field, he had finally reached his limit, laying back against the ground as the chain went off. A plume of flame erupted from the monster's mouth as it crashed to the ground. But it wasn't his attack that had destroyed the beast. Fang Xing emerged with an elixir meat sickle in hand. The flesh of the toad was a precious material used to craft expensive elixirs. Fong greeted the young master. It turned out they were destined to have at least one more farewell. Questions poured from the young master's mouth one after the other. And Fong was just tired of them. Were you the one that killed the beast? How haven't you exploded from eating the demonic meat directly? It was time he completed his promise and finished this trash off once and for all. As a joke, Fong insisted if his senior kneeled on the ground and begged for his life, he may consider letting him go. To his surprise, Ho Ching immediately dropped to his knees and offered up everything in his possession for his life. Fong would never have assumed that the young master was willing to bow his head to anybody. Ho Ching was going to pop a pill that would destroy his cultivation by a full level as soon as the little bandit got near. But Fong hadn't bought a word from the rich kid's mouth, as he ordered his golden serpent sword to force its way through his enemy's back. The look on Ho Ching's face was priceless. To think he thought the great 10th thief would fall for such petty tricks. Fong was sure he had once told this fool not to be so heavy-minded in the future, or sooner or later it would catch up to him. The flashbacks sprung before his eyes as he realized that the kid was none other than the thief who had robbed him for everything he had. He screamed, blaming Fong for all his problems. If he hadn't stole from him, he would have never had to participate in the talisman edict in the first place. All of his suffering was because of this young thief. Fong could care less how much Ho Ching had suffered. From the moment he kicked Xiao Man in front of the Sect's gate, he was a dead man walking. As he slowly drifted from this world, realization hit him. If he had only known earlier this was how it would end, he would have just queued up normally. It goes to show that sometimes you should just mind your own business and refrain from sticking your nose in other people's problems. As Fong stood there, relishing in his victory, his precious meat began to dissolve. All that was left was the python toad's demon spirit pill. Fong had a sense of oppression just by holding it in his hand. He decided even though it was risky, he would swallow the pill whole. He had survived once from doing something so foolish, so why couldn't he again? As he began to fade from this world, the foolishness of this child held no bounds. A pure black cat strolled into the field, sniffing the remains of everything he could, until he reached the young man who rose from death for a second time. In the end, the risk was worth it as he broke through to the 3rd stage of spiritual movement. He was eager to return home, but he realized that he had a situation that would be tough to explain to the elders who wouldn't be interested in hearing it. But to his surprise, he thought of just the right thing, and decided he would just go with that. He returned to the entrance of the sect with a frog leg in hand. As the guards confronted him, he dropped to the ground and spilled his beans like the child he was. As big tears welled up in his eyes, he recited these words word for word. I'm Fang Xing, an outer sect disciple. Half a month ago I went with senior brother Ho Ching to accept the talisman edict, and went to the demon miasma mountain to kill the python toad. But everything went wrong. All the other senior brothers are dead, and I'm the only one who survived. An elder arrived at the sound of a disciple crying. He wasn't impressed by the endless weeping and wailing of the little cultivator. As the two guards hurriedly explained the situation, he stopped them. He had had enough. He asked Fong to follow him, and told the two guards by no means were they to spread this story around the sect. Fong recited his story in full detail to a group of elders. As soon as they entered the mountain, before his senior brothers could even place the bait, the python toad appeared. His brothers had been caught unaware, but regardless they rushed into battle, but the demon turned out to be just too fearsome. In a short time, the two weaker senior brothers were the first to succumb to the monster. Fong admitted that he was useless in the whole battle. All he could do was hide behind a tree in hopes of not being discovered by the demonic toad. The brothers gave each other that side eye as they asked him did he know exactly what the bait was. But Fong shook his head, crying. He was never informed of the full details. He was only told that he would help place the bait and help distract the python toad. But none of them knew that the monster would rush to destroy them so quickly. Fong decided it was best if Ho Ching was remembered as a coward, so when his senior brother Ho realized he couldn't defeat the demonic python toad, he left senior brother Lu behind and ran away. But the creature didn't care about senior brother Lu San, who remained in place as the toad chased down senior brother Ho Ching and killed him. The elders bought his story. It was a tendency known among them that the python toad would chase down any moving target before a stationary one. In the end, Ho Ching shot his own self in the foot by cowardly retreating. They needed him to continue the story as they didn't know how the python toad was eventually defeated. After finishing its meal of senior brother Ho Ching, it turned and sucked in the two dead bodies. But in the process, it got senior brother Lu San also. All Fong could remember is he saw a blade in brother Lu San's hand as he was being sucked in. As soon as it had swallowed all his senior brothers, it turned its head to the sky and opened its mouth. Fong thought it was going to use some evil technique, so he ran as fast as he could. He was only lucky it chose not to chase him. In a day's time, he had built up enough courage to return to see what had happened. The giant toad had been long dead, and was in the process of being consumed by other demonic beasts. To his surprise, he found the corpses of his senior brothers inside the belly of the beast. It was a terrible sight he would never forget. The elders could only speculate that Lu San had destroyed the beast from within. But seeing as how he didn't survive, he must have run out of spiritual chi and perished along with the demonic python toad. The story he presented lined up perfectly. But the elders were more interested in the pill that should have remained after the toad's death. Fong insisted he searched everywhere but couldn't find it. That's the reason why he brought back the leg to prove his story. They knew that if only the useless kid had came back sooner than 1 day's time that he could have recovered the pill. But the chance of it remaining for so long was slim as any beast in the vicinity would have happily snatched it up. Since Fong hadn't recovered the demon spirit pill, the talisman edict would have to be considered a failure. They assured him that his life was the greatest reward he could ever receive. Fong agreed with them and decided it was time for him to excuse himself from their presence. But a single elder requested that he hold on for a moment. He ordered the young man to wait outside the door while they deliberated. The elder felt it was wise to pass the reward on to this young disciple. Even if they were losing a massive amount of money by not receiving the demonic pill, rewarding the kid and celebrating his success would do wonders for the sect. In recent years, no disciples have been interested in even taking part in the talisman edict. The disciples have all come to the understanding that it's better to cheat and steal from their martial brothers than to approach the talisman edict hall, to properly exchange resources for the materials they need to cultivate. And the reason for that is simple. They believe that anyone who takes on the talisman edict only has a 10% chance of survival. And when they do, they never receive the resources they need to properly progress. So it's no wonder that no one is willing to die in vain. The plan to force the disciples into the edict hasn't shown great results. The disciples would rather be stagnant forever than to needlessly die at the hand of beasts. This time around, they would count the boy as having completed the talisman edict, they would furnish him with all the rewards through his success, and played down the deaths of the other senior brothers. Then they would highly publicize the young cultivator's success. Seeing the success of the little kid would prompt other disciples to come forward to take the talisman edict. Fong did all he could to spy on the elder's conversation, but the old farts had set up some type of barrier to prevent any eavesdropping. Because of this, when they opened the doors, Fong fell straight into the room. As he tried to talk away this occurrence, the elder congratulated him on successfully completing the talisman edict. He wasted no time furnishing Fong with a satchel of stone essence powder. Fong reverently accepted the reward. The elder explained that his talisman edict wouldn't normally have been considered a success. However, since he was willing to go out and kill demons at such a young age, his courage was commendable. So they were all making an exception this time. But he was forbidden to tell others of the exception made for him. When asked by others, Fong was to tell them, he returned with the pill and everything was done according to regulations. Fong agreed that he understood. But inside he was ecstatic. He was sure his luck was beginning to change. But to his surprise, this elder was obviously setting him up to be robbed. He insisted the senior brother, Xian Zhao, escort him down the mountain. Fong wasn't a fool, but he had no choice but to accept this kindness. As he left with his senior brother, the look on the elder's face told the whole story. The two departed the grand temple atop the mountain together. Before long, they had made it to the point where there was no way for Fong to get lost. He thanked his senior brother for his kindness and all of the cultivation tips he furnished along the way. The senior brother inquired about Fong's cultivation level. When he found out that Fong was only at the peak of the first level of spiritual movement, he decided it was time to swindle Fong out of his rightful rewards. He offered to help the young fellow out by offering him a reward that was more in line with his rank. He would give Fong 1 spirit stone in exchange for the stone essence. Seeing as how the powder was no use to him at this time, Fong knew it was too good to be true. He was sure now that the elder had made the exception to give him the powder, only to give his nephew a chance to recover it. Being the elder didn't mean you weren't prone to corruption. Even an elder would have a hard time obtaining such a resource. The nephew of the elder continued to whisper sweet nothings into Fong's ear. BS went in one ear and BS came out the other. He even upped the number of spirit stones to 30 in exchange for the essence. And being the goofy fool that Fong was, he insisted that even he knew he could exchange the essence for 100 spirit stones in the black market. His senior brother had had enough and snatched the little brat up by the throat. He was done playing around, the little shit wasn't in the position to bargain in the first place. He slammed the little brat to the ground and stepped on his head. He was sure if he killed the little thing right now, that his uncle would have no trouble covering it up. He had tried to be generous, but the brat didn't appreciate the favors that were being done for him. Fong knew he was in a predicament. If he revealed the level of his cultivation now, it would only cost him trouble. So he reluctantly relinquished the powder. And he did his best to apologize for his disrespectful behavior. As he walked away, he recited the famous lines. The sect has always been a place where the weak will be trampled on. Seeing as how Fong was weaker than him, it was only right and he fully deserved it. Fong dusted himself off and watched the opportunistic senior brother leave with what rightfully belonged to him. As the senior brother casually strolled through the bamboo forest on top of the mountain, he was relishing in the good fortune of being born into a family with the best connections. When suddenly a noise caught his attention. As he turned to check it out, all he saw was a dagger slicing through the air towards him. Well, I hope you enjoyed this story. We're going to wrap this one up here. That was 32 chapters of the 71 chapters available, so if you're interested in me doing the second half of this story, please be so kind as to like, subscribe and comment down below.